Most gardeners treat February as the off-season, a month for planning and waiting. While their food budget drains away on expensive organic greens and root vegetables they could be growing right now. You're doing what everyone else does. But here's what most people miss. February planting isn't about surviving winter. It's about installing a strategic food system that prevents the summer crisis before it starts. Japanese farmers have known this for centuries. They use February to plant 20 specific crops that build soil, confuse pests, capture water, and produce continuous harvests for 9 months. Here are those 20 crops and the design intelligence that makes them feed you all year. Here's what most people miss about February planting. You're gardening backwards. You're waiting for warm weather to plant food when the real intelligence is using cold weather to install a self-regulating system that does the work for you. Japanese farmers don't plant in February because they're desperate for food. They plant because February is the foundation that makes everything else easier. When you install the right crops now, you're designing a system that feeds your soil while it feeds you, holds moisture through summer droughts, and confuses pest cycles before they start. The daikon radish is crop number 1, and it does 3 jobs simultaneously. It breaks up compacted soil with a taproot that drills down 18 inches deep, doing the work of a broad fork without you touching a tool. It produces edible greens in 30 days and thick, crisp roots in 60. And when you leave a few in the ground through spring, they become a natural bio-drilling service that improves drainage and aeration for every crop that follows. Think about it. One seed does the work of a tool, a fertilizer application, and a soil amendment, all while giving you food. Meanwhile, you're buying bagged amendments and renting tillers. Mizuna is your second crop, and it solves the salad problem you've been paying $4 per plastic clamshell to ignore. Mizuna grows faster than store-bought greens, tastes better, and cuts and comes again for 3 months straight. Plant it in February, harvest in 25 days, and keep cutting every week until May. But here's the reality. This isn't just a salad green. Mizuna is a mustard green with compounds that confuse aphids and flea beetles. It's a biological pest barrier you eat. Plant it around your brassicas and watch pest pressure drop across the entire bed. You're not fighting pests. You're designing them out before they arrive. Now let's talk about komatsuna, crop number 3. And this is where Japanese breeding shows its superiority over Western vegetable genetics. You know how spinach bolts the moment temperatures hit 70 degrees, turning bitter and worthless? Komatsuna doesn't bolt. It produces tender greens from February through June without a single flower stalk, handling frost down to 15 degrees Fahrenheit and growing in partial shade. This plant was selected for resilience, not convenience. When you plant komatsuna in February, you're installing a 6-month green vegetable supply that requires 0 maintenance and never disappoints. Meanwhile, your neighbors are replanting spinach every 3 weeks and losing half of it to heat. Crop number 4 is fava beans, and this is where the system logic becomes explicit. You're buying fertilizer in bags to feed summer tomatoes. Fava beans planted in February are manufacturing nitrogen in real time and depositing it directly into your soil without you spending $1. Every fava plant hosts rhizobia bacteria in root nodules that pull atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into plant-available form. When you harvest the beans in May and cut the stalks at soil level, leaving the roots in place, you're leaving behind a nitrogen deposit worth $20 per 100 square feet in commercial fertilizer equivalent. The beans themselves feed you at 3 stages: tender shoots in March, green pods in April, mature beans in May. The flowers attract early-season pollinators when almost nothing else is blooming. One crop does 4 jobs. This is multifunctional design. Crop number 5 is garlic, and most people think they miss the window because garlic is typically planted in fall. But here's what most people miss. February planted garlic still produces usable bulbs by July, just smaller. More importantly, garlic is a living pest fence. The sulfur compounds repel aphids, spider mites, and Japanese beetles. Plant it as a border around your entire February bed and watch pest pressure collapse. You're not fighting insects with sprays. You're installing a chemical barrier they won't cross. Garlic also suppresses fungal diseases through natural antifungal compounds released by the roots. One crop prevents 3 problems while giving you food. This is design-first thinking. Scallions are crop number 6, and they solve the continuous harvest problem everyone struggles with. You plant a dozen scallion seedlings in February and harvest green onions every single week from March through November if you manage them correctly. Here's the mechanism. Scallions are perennial if you don't pull the entire plant. Cut them an inch above the soil line and they regrow in 10 days. One planting becomes an endless supply. You're buying scallions at the store for $3 per bunch every week. That's over $150 per year for something you could grow once and harvest forever. The space requirement is 6 inches per plant. You can fit 20 plants in 1 square foot. Crop number 7 is lettuce mix, but not the way most people grow it. You're planting it as a living mulch under taller crops. In February, broadcast lettuce seed densely between your fava beans, garlic, and brassicas. The lettuce germinates fast, covers bare soil, suppresses weeds, and provides continuous salad harvests while the taller crops develop. When the taller crops start shading the lettuce in April, you harvest the entire lettuce layer and use it as chop and drop mulch, feeding the soil and conserving moisture at the same time. You've just turned a weed problem into a food source and a fertility source simultaneously. Now let's talk about crops 8 through 12. And this is where soil building becomes embedded in your harvest rhythm instead of being a separate task you pay for. Crop number 8 is bok choy, another non-bolting brassica that handles cold, produces in 40 days, and when you harvest it, you cut at the base and leave the root system in the soil to decompose and feed the next crop. You're not extracting fertility, you're cycling it. Crop number 9 is tatsoi, a rosette-forming Asian green that grows low and dense, perfect for edges and containers, ready in 35 days, frost-hardy to 20 degrees. Crop number 10 is Tokyo turnips, which produce edible greens in 3 weeks and sweet, crisp roots in 5 weeks. You harvest the greens first as cut and come again, then pull the roots later. 1 seed, 2 crops, 0 replanting. But here's the reality. These aren't just vegetables. They're components in a closed-loop fertility system. Every brassica you cut leaves roots that decompose into humus. Every harvest creates gaps you fill with nitrogen-fixing crops. Every plant feeds the soil biology that feeds the next plant. Meanwhile, you're watching neighbors buy bagged compost and synthetic fertilizers to replace the fertility their design bleeds away. Crop 11 is snap peas, planted on a trellis in February. And this is where vertical space becomes fertility infrastructure. The peas climb upward, fixing nitrogen just like the fava beans, but they also create a living nitrogen trellis. When the peas finish producing in May, you cut them at soil level and plant pole beans in the same spot. The beans climb the dead pea stalks, which slowly decompose and release nitrogen directly to the bean roots. You've created a succession system where one crop builds the structure and fertility for the next crop without you adding anything. This is what design-first gardening looks like. Crop 12 is walking onions, a perennial onion that produces top bulbs instead of seeds. You plant them once in February and they multiply themselves every year, providing green onions, bulbs, and new starts indefinitely. One planting becomes permanent infrastructure. Think about it. You install this once and harvest forever. Meanwhile, conventional gardeners are replanting onions from expensive sets every single spring, treating a perennial food source as an annual expense. Here's where it gets interesting. You're not managing 12 separate crops. You're observing a polyculture where each element supports every other element. The nitrogen fixers feed the heavy feeders. The pest-repelling alliums protect the brassicas. The deep-rooted daikon breaks up soil for shallow-rooted greens. The living mulch suppresses weeds for the tall crops. This is the difference between a garden and an ecosystem. One requires constant intervention. The other regulates itself. Crop 13 is another layer of this system, Chinese cabbage, which forms dense heads in 50 days and handles frost down to 25 degrees. But here's what most people miss. Chinese cabbage planted in February doesn't compete with your summer garden. It harvests in April, freeing space for warm season crops exactly when you need it. You're not fighting for space. You're designing succession into the same square footage. Crop 14 is mustard greens, the spicy brassicas that grow faster than any other leaf vegetable, ready to harvest in 21 days. They're so vigorous they outcompete weeds, so pest-resistant they repel flea beetles, and so cold-hardy they survive hard freezes that kill lettuce. Crop 15 is green onions from seed, which cost pennies compared to buying sets. Direct seed them in February, thin them as scallions in March, and let the rest mature into storage onions by July. One seed packet gives you 300 onions for $3. Do the math. You're paying 50 cents per onion at the store, buying what you could grow for a penny. Crop 16 is arugula, another cut-and-come-again green that most people only know as an expensive salad mix. Plant it densely in February, harvest the outer leaves starting at 3 weeks, and keep cutting for 2 months. It handles frost, grows in partial shade, and when it finally bolts, the flowers are edible and peppery. The seed pods taste like mild horseradish. You're getting 3 crops from one planting: baby greens, flowers, and seed pods. Meanwhile, the roots are breaking down in the soil and feeding the next crop. This is how you close the loop without buying inputs. Crop 17 is cilantro, and if you've ever tried to grow cilantro in summer, you know it bolts in 3 weeks and tastes terrible. February planted cilantro grows slowly, stays vegetative for 3 months, and produces massive amounts of leaves before finally flowering in May. When it does flower, let it. The flowers attract parasitic wasps and lacewings that eat aphids. When the flowers set seed, you get coriander, a spice worth $8 per ounce at the store. One plant gives you fresh cilantro for 12 weeks and a year's supply of coriander seed. But here's where it gets interesting for modern gardeners who don't have a farm. I know you're thinking, I don't have space for 20 crops. I have a patio, a balcony, or a small yard with an HOA breathing down my neck. Here's the reality. These crops work in containers, vertical systems, and 4x4 raised beds better than conventional summer vegetables because they don't need deep soil or full sun. They're designed for efficiency, not expansion. Crop 18 is microgreens, and this changes everything about speed and space. You can grow microgreens indoors on a windowsill in 7 days from seed to harvest. One 10 by 20 inch tray produces the nutritional equivalent of $5 worth of grocery store greens. You harvest with scissors, replant immediately, and repeat every week. No soil depth required, no outdoor space needed, just a bright window and a week of patience. This is production gardening in 1 square foot. Meanwhile, you're buying microgreens at $12 per container and treating them like a luxury instead of a system you could install on your kitchen counter. Crop 19 is perennial kale varieties like Dobbintons or Taunton Dean, and this is the crop that eliminates replanting forever. You plant them once in February in a container at least 12 inches deep, and they produce side shoots for 5 to 7 years. You never replant kale again. You just harvest side shoots every week, and the plant keeps producing. One installation gives you 7 years of continuous food. Think about it. This is infrastructure thinking. Install once, harvest indefinitely, while conventional gardeners are buying kale starts every spring and treating a perennial food source as an annual expense. But here's what most people miss about container growing. You're not limited by space. You're limited by design. Stack containers vertically. Use railing planters on balconies. Hang grow bags on walls. A 4x8 foot patio can hold 20 containers, producing year-round food if you use vertical space and succession planting. The February crops harvest in March and April, freeing containers for warm season crops in May. You're using the same physical space twice, doubling production from the same square footage. This is the thinking that separates gardeners who complain about space from homesteaders who design around constraints. Now let's talk about the last crop, number 20, because this is the keystone species that unlocks everything else. Crimson clover is a nitrogen-fixing cover crop that you plant in any gap, any bare soil, any space between crops. It grows fast, covers the ground, suppresses weeds, and when it flowers in April, You cut it and leave it on the soil surface as mulch. The roots stay in the ground, decomposing and releasing nitrogen. The surface mulch breaks down and builds humus. You've just created fertility from air and sunlight. But here's the mechanism most people miss. Crimson clover flowers are massive pollinator magnets. They attract bees when almost nothing else is blooming, supporting early season pollination for your fruiting crops. When you cut the clover and use it as mulch, you're creating a slow-release nitrogen source that feeds your summer crops for months. One seed does 5 jobs: fixes nitrogen, suppresses weeds, feeds pollinators, builds soil, and mulches your next planting. This is multifunctional design at the system level. Here's what this 20-crop system actually does to your year. And this is where the design intelligence becomes undeniable. You plant in February, spending maybe 2 hours total over one weekend. You harvest continuously from March through November, without replanting most of it. The nitrogen-fixing crops build your soil, while the pest-repelling crops prevent problems before they start. The deep-rooted crops mine minerals and break up compacted soil. The perennial crops eliminate replanting forever. The succession crops fill every gap and suppress every weed. You've designed a system that prevents the July watering crisis because deep-rooted February crops hold moisture in the soil. You've prevented the August pest explosion because diverse plantings and pest-repelling alliums confused insect life cycles months before pests emerged. You've eliminated the September replanting scramble because perennials and self-seeding crops keep producing without intervention. Meanwhile, you're spending 15 minutes per week maintaining this system instead of 2 hours per day fighting a conventional summer garden that's designed backwards. You're not battling weeds because living mulch suppressed them in March. You're not hauling water because deep-rooted crops captured February rains and held them in the soil profile. You're not spraying pests because companion plantings confused them before they established populations. You're not buying fertilizer because nitrogen-fixing legumes manufactured it for free. Every problem you're used to fighting was prevented by design decisions you made in February. This is the difference between intervention and design. This is what Japanese farmers understood centuries ago and what modern gardening forgot in the rush to sell you solutions to problems your garden design created. You're not gardening anymore. You're observing a system you installed, harvesting what it produces, and letting it regulate itself. February isn't a planting month. It's the keystone habit that gives your entire year back.